Hey everyone, welcome to the Evangelist Nick Garrett channel, Truth First Christianity in a Post-Christian Country, where we separate the objective and factual from the subjective and traditional for the benefit of our Christian faith. Have I got something for you today? Have you ever heard of the Secret of Fatima? Today I'm going to get to the bottom of it. I'm going to share the history. I'm going to share some skeptical points. I'm going to share some things that are interesting, maybe up in the air. I'm going to leave it up to you to decide whether anything really happened here or not. But I have really got some interesting stuff to share, new stuff that has not been discussed anywhere. And I want to start with this. Fatima was in Portugal. The miracle was said to have taken place over a series of months that began on May 13th, 1917. Allegedly, an apparition occurred with three young shepherd children named Lucia de Jesus and Francesca and Jacinta Marto. They saw a strange light at about noon that they originally thought was lightning. They were told that they must pray much and return each month on the 13th, and they did so. And their visits were preceded by visitations of angels to prepare for this divine mystery. And the point was to help them understand that God was going to entrust a message to them. Let me share something interesting with you about Portugal at the time. 1917, you got to remember, here we're towards the end of World War I. Portugal is involved, but at home there's a lot of unrest. Every 10 or 20 years, you have new governments forming. They had just come out of a period of constitutional monarchy and had recently become a republic. Let me share just the basic online review of history about religion at the time. The First Republic was intensely anti-clerical. The leaders of the Republic were secularists and indeed were following liberal tradition of de-establishing the powerful role of the Catholic Church once held. This is what's occurring in Portugal at the time of this alleged visitation that happened over a 6-month period and culminated in the children saying, "Hey, a miracle's going to happen, come watch." And allegedly the sun did some strange things in the sky that there are all these eyewitness accounts of. Over that time, there were 3 miracles or 3 visions or 3 points. The first 2 were given during the time. The third was said, keep it a secret till after 1960. Pope Benedict XVI allegedly released this secret, but there's more to get to there. I just want to give you a little bit of the information. The first 2 alleged miracles dealt with visions of heaven and hell, the end of World War I and the beginning of the Second World War. They were very explicit. Allegedly, the Virgin Mary's voice was clear and spoke these. The third secret, there was no voice. It was a revelation for later. We're going to get to that. But I wanted to show you we're going to set the stage. Under the leadership of Afonso Costa, the justice minister, the revolution immediately targeted the Catholic Church. This is about 1910 and 11. Churches were plundered, convents were attacked, and clergy were harassed. Scarcely had the provisional government been installed when it began devoting its entire attention to an anti-religious policy. In spite of the disastrous economic condition, on October 10th, 5 days after the inauguration of the Republic, the new government decreed that all convents, monasteries, and religious orders were to be suppressed. All residents of religious institutions were expelled and their goods confiscated. The Jesuits were forced to forfeit their Portuguese citizenship, and a series of anti-Catholic laws and decrees followed each other in rapid succession. World War I starts in 1914. Portugal has a role in this war. They attempted to maintain their neutrality, but were eventually forced into some action. But this sets the stage for this alleged series of miracles that happened in 1917, beginning on May 13th. Now, there are several points to this. One is the sun miracle phenomenon, right? 2 is the visitations and what was said. The actual secret is in the papal safe in the papal apartments. It's made of wood. Canon lawyers confirm that there are many people who would have access to this safe, not just the Pope. And the third secret was placed inside here, and it wasn't to be read till after 1960. Pope Benedict XVI doesn't really do anything with it until after 2000, but he did write on this in 1984. It's interesting that he became the Pope after John Paul II. He's the one to release this secret, and he had written on Fatima early in his life, but we're going to find some discrepancies with that. The third secret, or sometimes it's referred to the second part of the third secret or the fourth secret, deals with the consecration of Russia to Mary's Immaculate Heart. Canon lawyers confirm that Sister Lucia, who was the main person who kept having all these visions, was precise in her accounts. 1945, by then she had spent several decades in the monastery. Apparently these events had an impact on her life, and she became a Carmelite nun. By the end of her life, she said that the secret had not been fulfilled. She lived, I think, into the 80s or 90s. I can't recall exactly, but modern times for sure. The deal was the consecration of Russia was a big deal in the third secret, right? And that occurs when the Pope and all the bishops in the world pray for Russia, which is, canon lawyers presume it means the same day, because it can't be the same time because of all the different time zones. Now, that never occurred. When Benedict XVI became Pope, he did pray for consecration of the whole world, but not specifically Russia. Point of skepticism here. What about other orthodoxies? Greek Orthodox, Persian Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. It is interesting to me that these visitations and these miracles have nothing to do with them, nothing to do with any Protestant Christians at all. Why is it that these things only occur in the context of Roman Catholicism? And it is also very interesting, given what I shared about the history of Portugal at this time, that you have something, this big miracle that puts Catholicism back on the map, returns people to the faith. It's very interesting. It's either, if it is supernatural, there's obviously a divine purpose to it. If it's not supernatural, it's awful convenient that it occurred in Portugal, given what was happening at the time. Let's take a look at what Pope Benedict ended up releasing near the 2000s. Remember, this part wasn't supposed to be released till after 1960. Here's what he asserts is the secret, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's a hoax. So Vatican vision of the early 2000s wasn't accurate. It's why is this better understood after 1960? First of all, the angel with the flaming sword shouts, "Penance, penance, penance." Well, that's not a secret or relevant given the finished work of Christ. Why would that be a secret? It's not a secret. It's all through Scripture. It's a religious idea that's everywhere. Here's the other thing that's interesting. The Sister Lucia says that one of the things that happens is the Pope in white is walking up the hill toward the cross and soldiers shoot him. That has to do with part of the third secret. But she uses the word cadaveres, which got interpreted by the Benedictine document as, bodies, like dead bodies. But it's never ever used in Scripture. It's not in the Latin, cadaveres. It's only used in reference to apostates or lost souls. Apparently the Pope is praying over them as he goes up this hill, and he's, as I said, but it's interesting context given what cadavers are used for. Think about that. But in the history of salvation, only cadaveres only ever deals with apostates. Maybe after World War I, given the vast millions of deaths that occurred, that resulting in wartime superstition, maybe the word cadaver, maybe the etymology of the word was changing. But that right there in itself is pretty interesting. Here's the second reason that what Benedict put out was a hoax. The first secret had to do with a vision of heaven and hell. The second secret dealt with the ending of World War I and the beginning of World War II. Interesting that it doesn't say anything about the Spanish flu, but it does make reference to a Pope Pius XI. I do find that pretty interesting. Russia is named as a country in this second secret. You got to remember, during the time, it's still the USSR. There's 20-something Soviet socialist republics banded together at this time. It's not Russia. That is interesting. So why is the third secret so vague in the Benedictine letter when the first two are so precise, so clear? Here, a point of skepticism. Other documents were in circulation at the time that talked about and mapped out the events of World War I, World War II, etc. So it wouldn't have been a stretch to look at these documents from the late 1800s and early 1900s and make some sort of prophecy about them. It's certainly not unique for the time about those first two. The third reason I think it's a hoax is there's no logical connection. One of the things in it was that in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will be preserved. Well, I shared with you right off the bat, there's a lot of good reason to have a mass miracle happen in Portugal during the 19-teens, given what was happening to the clerics and people in religious life at the time. Now, in 1984, Benedict writes, and he says, the third secret has to do with the end of times. But then later, when he writes in there, he says, all the prophecies were fulfilled. It had to do with the shooting of Pope John Paul II in 1981. But remember, John Paul II didn't die. Allegedly, the vision said the Pope was killed, right? So that right there shows. It speaks of the Pope's death, but he wasn't killed. So there's a contradiction. In 1984, Benedict writes that this deals with end times, but then when he releases some documents, it's, it all happened. That's interesting to me. It keeps confusion going. So the actual secret, the other discrepancy is that 2 envelopes are alleged. One that has 4 to 5 pages of handwritten notes by this Sister Lucia, and one envelope that has 1 page of handwritten notes. Proof number 5, the method of theology, right? Thomas Aquinas teaches us about method of theology involving common sense, and something that is not easy to explain, not using common sense for it, will never automatically, miraculously be explained by common sense approach. A few skeptical points here. What about all the other denominations? Again, they don't have anything to do with this. That's interesting to me. The other thing is when this alleged secret came out from Pope Benedict XVI, the media didn't challenge it at all. There were no theories, there were no criticisms of it. I mean, the media loves to criticize religious stuff, supernatural stuff. They didn't say a word about it. It came out almost like a press release and nobody said a word. No conspiracy theories, no real issue from enemies or anything like that. Now, it is telling to me that Benedict becomes the Pope. In 1984, John Paul II was the Pope, and he'd be Pope for a lot longer. And then Benedict XVI, who had written about Fatima, becomes the Pope, and he's the one to release this information. That is very interesting. The prophecy, the actual prophecy itself, the secret prophecy that was allegedly released, talks about the Pope in white, going up the hill toward the cross, shot by soldiers. Now, any Pope that comes along after Benedict XVI that reads this can dress in white. So it almost invalidates the miraculous, quote-unquote, aspect of this whole thing. So in the apparition, Mary identifies herself as the Lady of the Rosary. She requests that a chapel be built in her honor. Here's my issue with it. First of all, it smacks of Gnosticism. And secondly, I'm sorry, if anybody has kind of a devotion to Mary and they watch my channel, even my Catholic friends, nothing at all about Jesus Christ, his death or resurrection, his finished work, nothing in any of this. We're supposed to believe that this miracle happened where Theotokos, according to Catholics, the mother of God, really according to all Christians, they would have no problem using that term on the surface, where she comes and says, build a chapel to me? All right, well, maybe if she says, build a chapel to my son, use the rosary only to pray to my son, not me also, I'd have a lot easier time with this. But Jesus Christ is the only mediator between God and man. And now we have a situation being set up with a co-redemptrix. And it's important to understand what had happened during the early 1900s and the time leading up to the Second Vatican Council. John Hardin's catechism notes that at the time, the Curia, the College of Cardinals, They had openly and willingly adopted modernism as their governing worldview. This is in the preface to his catechism, which means they were moving toward purposely changing everything about what had traditionally been the Latin Roman Catholic Church. They were moving in a direction purposefully. And then you have this feminine aspect to the whole thing introduced with this alleged apparition. And others after, many others, right? There's Our Lady of Akita, Our Lady of Medjugorje. And I find it interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw interesting things like the Catholic Church being criticized and or persecuted and or kicked out, and then we have a miracle occur in that country. That's kind of the thing I was getting at with sharing information about Portugal with you. I want to talk about the writings of eyewitness accounts. This is higher criticism, not textual criticism, so I'm sharing my opinion here. The writing of the eyewitnesses are just too perfect. It really seems as if it's like two people sitting down and writing all these different eyewitness accounts. Well, it seemed as if the sun did this, and it's like they're trying to sound skeptical, like, I'd never believe in miracles, but then I saw it. You almost, whether the person is allegedly a monsignor or a lawyer or an ordinary person, some of them just say ordinary person, and oh, interestingly, the kids are shepherds, right? Wasn't Jesus a shepherd? You have numerology and it happening on the 13th of every month. One God, three in the Trinity, 1 and 3. All these things are just too perfect. It's I would love to do a video on this subject just with the etymology of the words and numerology, because I think we'd probably find a very specific set of circumstances there too. You can tell that the allegedly unaware, average, everyday poor person in Portugal is well aware of the greater world when you read these eyewitness accounts. They're not hillside shepherds, and it's like they're purposely trying to sound skeptical. Now, I had an interesting thought while doing the research for this. What if they don't care at all what we think? What if this miracle is for people a century from now or 2 centuries from now? And they're going to look back at it the same way we look back at the First Council of Nicaea. There's an air of mystery just because it's old, even though we have primary source documents. There are so many ideas and theories that are built off the canons, even though they're specific. And we have this event during World War I, this alleged visitation, and 2 centuries from now, people are going to look at it with that same air of mystery that we look at the ancient world with. That's just an interesting thought I had about this. Now, there was a sun miracle, right? A sun miracle phenomenon. The sun danced around in the sky. Now, scientists did this part. I thought was weak. The argumentation against it was pretty weak. It was people doing tests to debunk it where they stare at the sun, and that's somehow like a scientific thing, or the eyewitness accounts. Some people say the sun danced and fell like a feather, went vertical, and sky went horizontal across the sky, changed in size. The scientific criticism was, oh, this is a phenomenon that happens when people stare at the sun. Or, hey, since it happened with the sun, we automatically need to explore the idea that there are natural means occurring and not supernatural means. But again, if this is a designed, set up thing to stop the erosion of Catholicism in Portugal, I'm sure they pre-planned, we have to put something out where maybe it can't be proven, but it also can't be debunked. That's the point. We don't need to prove it. We just need to let enough mysterious things be out there so that, people leave that air of mystery and potential that it happened open to them. Overall, I have trouble with this because of the fact that Christ doesn't appear to be in it at all. It has to do with prophecies that all make Rome preeminent and powerful, ignore every other aspect of Christianity in the world, nothing to do with the gospel or salvation. All the prayers is for people to return to Rome, to return to Catholicism, issues affecting the Pope. Now, there are some very interesting things. For example, things I didn't think of, and I was doing research and said, whoa, this is kind of weird. If the vision allegedly occurred in 1917, and it does point to Russia, and it says this will make more sense after 1960. If there is a primary source that says this prior to World War II, this is interesting. This is interesting. During 1917, the Russian Revolution was occurring or ending or getting ready to occur. Now, communism, right? It almost looks like the lady is saying, consecrate Russia, communism's coming, this isn't good. The church has promoted and developed modernism. And now let's look at what's occurring today. You have the Amazonian Synod occurring, which is based on the writings of a man who left the priesthood. This would be like Arius during the time of Nicaea being the leader of a church council. You have a technical heretic leading the direction of the church. An avowed communist left the priesthood and married another avowed communist. And now this whole synod is moving the Roman Catholic Church and potentially their dogma and doctrines, to the extent that it's legal to do that, into a more communist idea and worldview. And what do we hear the Catholic Church talking about today? They're all up in every country's business. Any country that believes in their own sovereignty is bad. World government is good. World religion is good. One world economy is good. I mean, these are really interesting, deep, prophetic, revelatory, long-term subjects when you look at things like the Book of Revelation and the actions of Rome relative to them. So I'm highly skeptical of these miracle things. Now, there are a lot of very interesting nuances here, but at the same time, this clearly can all be set up and created. And given the circumstances in Portugal at the time, we're left with a dilemma. Do you look at it and say, okay, because of the conditions in Portugal, it was perfectly set up for a divine intervention, a true one? Or because we're losing our power in Portugal and other parts of the world, we need to have something occur that will reestablish us there long term so the faith can prevail. It's a fascinating subject. I'm sharing what I learned with you. As always, I'm going to leave it up to you to decide what you think occurred or didn't occur. Leave a comment on this one. I want to see what other people think about it. Hopefully, I'll get a wide spectrum of views from it. As far as perspectives, like, share, and I'll talk to you on the next one. Thanks.